and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Singing What You Can't Say, Musical Responses to Traumatic Events, a talk and musical demonstration by Professor Lorry Black. Lorry Black is the Associate Director of the Lowell Milken Fund for American Jewish Music at the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. A percussionist, pedagogue, arts presenter, and Jewish music scholar, Dr. Black works in multiple specialties, including music of the French concentration camps, contemporary synagogue music and practice, and klezmer. Dr. Black holds a Doctor of Musical Arts in Sacred Music from the USC Thornton School of Music, where he specialized in Jewish music and music of the Holocaust. When he's finished with his presentation, Lorry will answer questions. And actually, if you have a question during his presentation, feel free to type it in the comment box. Lorry, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thank you so much for having me. It really is my pleasure and honor to do this program with the LA Museum of the Holocaust. I am an LA native. I've lived here my entire life, and working with local organizations is one of my passions, and working within my field is another one of my passions. So this works out beautifully. This topic is one. Well, first I should say just a little bit about my biography. That the direction that I'm coming from this, that I look at things from the performer's perspective, the scholar's perspective, and the presenter's perspective. That I'm always trying to look at music from both a presentational point of view and from a research point of view. And I think that really is what influences a lot of my work, and it's going to influence greatly what you're going to hear today. So this topic, so often I get the opportunity to present on something like my research, or work with an organization to maybe do a program about Theresienstadt or some of the other common musical topics related to the Holocaust. But when given just a blank slate to really think about what I want to present on, I was really spending time thinking about the comparisons between music and art that is coming out today in response to COVID-19 and other traumatic events in the world, and how that relates to the music that I've been observing for so long. And so with that, the idea for this program focused on a broad range of musical responses to trauma really took place. So with that, I'm going to stop talking for a moment, and I'm going to go ahead and play some music for you. This first piece that I'll be playing comes from the Baragovsky collection of Jewish music, one of the earliest and most comprehensive collections of Eastern European Jewish music that we have. I'll frame this just a little bit so you can see the instrument. This particular piece was recorded from an individual who was 60 years old. He's a clarinetist living in Kiev in 1935. So as I play it, it's worth thinking about where did this individual come from, and what did he live through, the pogroms that he lived through in 1914 and 1936. All of this was really part of his life. And in picking this first piece to introduce to you, that really was going through my head. So with that, this is the first and only solo instrumental work I'll be playing tonight, this morning. gonna take my seat now and get reset just a little bit. So if you're just coming in, that was Taksim from the Berezovsky collection. It was collected from an individual in 1936. It was originally a work for clarinet, and I since arranged it, recreated it for xylophone. And also, if you are just coming in, this is your opportunity to ask me questions. So please do post anything that you want to ask me about the music I'm playing, about the material that I'm talking about, etc. Even just to say hi. If you're a friend of mine, please do say hi. Moving on, exploring this idea of the role music can play in traumatic events. I really was interested in a few particular tracks. So one being the role of documentation. I find it truly fascinating how just as the title suggests, how songs can offer insight into the lives, individuals of people who experience massive events, things that we usually think of abstractly, like the Holocaust. I always find that the lyrics to these songs, the way they're created, the context in which they're created, really offers me insight into the experience that I couldn't get otherwise. And this idea of documentation is one that really excites me. So the next song that I'm going to introduce is not directly related to the Holocaust, but is deeply related to a great trauma in both Jewish culture and in American culture. Many of you will be familiar with a really terrible event known as the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire was an event that took place where in one of these sweatshops in early New York, early 20th century New York, one of these sweatshops, which didn't have the proper safety standards, caught fire, and a massive fire ensued, which killed many, many people. It also did set off one of the large moves in creating worker safety standards. And the reason this intersects with Jewish culture so closely is because so many of the individuals who perished within the fire were in fact Jewish. They were largely Jewish immigrants and Italian immigrants. Sorry, I'm setting up my music in another position. Now I'm going to be on another instrument. And one of the ways this event was documented was through song. So an individual by the name of Morris Rosenfeld, he lived from 1862 to 1923. He was known as known as a sweatshop poet. Wrote an incredibly powerful song about this event. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Here we go. So because this is a Yiddish song, I wanted to share the English lyrics first. This is a photo of Morris Rosenfeld. Don't look for me where myrtles are green. You will not find me there, my beloved. Where lives wither at the machines, there is my resting place, mein Ruheplatz. Don't look for me where birds sing. You will not find me there, my beloved. I am a slave where chains ring. There is my resting place, mein Ruheplatz. Don't look for me where fountains spray. You will not find me there, my beloved. Where tears flow and teeth gnash, there is my resting place. And if you love me with true love, so come to me, my good beloved, and cheer my gloomy heart, and make sweet my resting place. When I first heard this song, it spoke to me. It spoke to to so much of this my personal feelings about the way we can look at the world and explore an event. And what always stood out to me was just how each step begins with hope. You want to find somebody in the myrtles and greens. You're looking for somebody where the bird sings. You look where the fountains are spraying. You're looking in all these beautiful places, and then somehow that's pulled apart. You will not find me there. Where lives wither at the where lives wither at the machine is this turning point where it creates a contrast between the natural world, which is so beautiful, and how things like machines chains, tears, all tear apart this beautiful idea of what could be a perfect world. And for many individuals who had just immigrated, they had seen, you know, they'd seen the United States as the land of milk and honey. You know, really as the new Jewish homeland in many ways. In fact, there are many Yiddish songs written about that, and that's for another program. So with that, I'm going to sing Mein Ruheplatz by Morris Rosenfeld. After I tune real quick. There we go. Nicht such mich wo, die mitten grünen, gefindest mich dort, nicht mein Schatz. Wo Lebenswelken bei Maschinen, dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Nicht such mich wo die Vögel singen, gefindest mich dort, nicht mein Schatz. Schlaf bin ich, wo Ketten klingen, dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Nicht such mich wo Fontane spritzen, gefindest mich dort, nicht mein Schatz. Wo Tränen rinnen, Zähne kritzen, dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Dorten ist mein Ruheplatz. Und liebst du mich mit wahrer Liebe, du komm zu mir, mein guter Schatz. Und heiter auf mein Herz das Triebe und mach mir süß mein Ruheplatz. Und mach mir süß mein Ruheplatz. If anyone is interested in looking for a professional recording of that where I'm not singing, I encourage you to listen to Daniel Kahn's arrangement. Daniel Kahn is a fantastic Yiddish troubadour, really, in the modern time, and he also inserts a really interesting English passage where it's his own poetic translation of the work. So I encourage you to listen to that one. I'm getting a question in here. How long after the fire was that song written? You know, I honestly don't know exactly the year on it, but it was very soon after. My understanding was it was a direct reaction within the first months. But that's a really interesting question. If you're interested in exploring it, I would encourage you. The name of the song, to repeat, was Mein Ruheplatz by Morris Rosenfeld. And there's lots of resources written about Morris Rosenfeld. This is not the only song or poem that he wrote. So there's lots of wonderful material to explore on that. And thank you, Eve Miller and Helene Cohen, for listening. So the next song I will introduce, I'm going to give myself a little break, and I'm going to play a recording of. But first I want to introduce it just a little bit. So this is one that's truly a standard in the Yiddish and klezmer world. This particular tune is called Es Brennt, or It's Burning. It was written by Mordecai Gruber, who lived from 1877 to 1942. In 1938, he wrote this in response to a pogrom. So in a lot of ways, this song is quite prescient as to what was going to happen to European Jewry in the coming years. Mordecai Gruber, a little bit about him. In many ways, he is the godfather of Yiddish song. He was born in Krakow in 1877, and he made his living as a carpenter. But just as I was describing Daniel Kahn, he was a troubadour. He was a folk poet and songwriter, and he wrote for the Jewish people. And he is one of these interesting cases where he, lived a pretty extensive life prior to the war, so his perspective was different than, say, some of the individuals who grew up in a concentration camp. Unfortunately, he perished in 1942. He was shot and killed by Germans when he refused to comply with a deportation order. But I think it would probably please him to know that his song, this song Es Brennt, would become a real call to action for the Krakow underground. I'll read you the English text. It's burning, brothers, it's burning. Oi, our poor shtetl is burning. Raging winds are fanning the wild flames and furiously tearing, destroying and scattering everything. All around, all is burning. And you stand and look just so, you with folded hands. And you stand and look just so while our shtetl burns. It's burning, brothers, it's burning. Oi, our poor shtetl is burning. The moment is at hand when, God forbid, our town, along with all of us, will be turned to ashes by the flames, and only bare black walls will remain, as after a battle. Our town is burning, and only you can save it. Extinguish the fire with your very blood if you must. Don't just stand there, brothers, with folded hands. Don't stand there. Put out the fire. Our shtetl is burning. And I think this song is truly indicative of another type of song that comes out of a traumatic event. One where it's both a call to action and a move to build solidarity. And I think that's exactly what Es Brennt did, that it was in fact very effectual in its role. So with that, I'm going to share a wonderful recording of Es Brennt. This is not, I should say, the recording quality is not perfect, but this is the incomparable cantor Yanki Lemmer performing with Nachman Rosen. Yanki Lemmer is one of the the few chazans these days that are doing what we would think of as the cantorial styles of the golden age, kind of harking back to people like Yossel Rosenblatt. So I think he really captures the idea of this song.
We
almost forgot to unmute myself. Thank you. So that was I didn't mean to cut it off just before the ending, but I hope you enjoyed that song. One thing that I would love to point out to you now that you've heard it is something that I actually only just recently learned, and that's the role of in music we break down the space between notes in what we call intervals, and there's the use of the fourth in this particular song in a very pronounced way. It sounds like this. And what I had never really come to understand was that that is actually imitating the sound of the sirens. So if you can listen, wow, 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 it's the sound of what a traditional European siren would sound like. Anyone who's ever visited Europe and you've heard this coming down the street, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And to build that in to the sound of the song, I think is really powerful. The idea that the sonic space that he was occupying during the pogrom that he lived through is what he was trying to recreate within the context of this particular song. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next song I'm introducing, which to talk about a program like this and not mention something from Theresienstadt, which is truly a unique space, would be, in this particular instance, I think is just such an interesting opportunity to explore how, in a very organized, organized formalist fashion, people can create have their own responses to traumatic events and really create something incredibly special. So for that, I really wanted to discuss in brief an individual named Gideon Klein. Gideon Klein was a young man in the concentration camps. He lived from 1919 to 1945, so he lived to the age of 26. And he wrote a multitude of works, both prior to his stay in both Theresienstadt and Auschwitz, and while he was in Theresienstadt. He was part of something known as the Studio for New Music that existed within Theresienstadt. Theresienstadt being a concentration camp that was organized as kind of a model camp by the Nazis. So lots of artists, musicians, actors, etc. were put into this concentration camp and were allowed to continue their activities in part as a means of propaganda for the Nazis, but it also had the after effect of, allowing Jewish musicians, Jewish artists to create new works that were profound. Gideon Klein was a unique individual in his own right. He was truly a prodigy. He was touring Europe by the age of 18, and in fact, when he was kicked out of the conservatory, when Jews were kicked out of institutes of higher education, he chose to just go on tour, and did. He toured until he was captured in France and eventually sent to Theresienstadt, where he became part of the Studio for New Music with Victor Ullmann, Hans Krasse, Pavel Haas, and a few other composers as well, but those being the main ones. Gideon Klein was also known throughout the camp as for organizing programs for the children, organizing music. He composed and arranged for the camp choirs, and so he found himself to be one of these individuals who was kind of a linchpin of the musical world within the concentration camp. Gideon Klein's background is Czech, and so he brings a lot of Czech aesthetic to the music. In fact, the second movement of the Gideon Klein string trio, of which we're actually listening to the third movement coming up, but the second movement includes a Moravian folk melody. So there is so much to say about Gideon Klein and what a unique and interesting individual he was, but unfortunately, just with the amount of time that we have here, I could teach an entire course on Gideon Klein, so there's a lot to explore. What you're about to hear is the third movement of his string trio. This is a fast, exciting movement. I think the context within which this song was written was in and of itself profound. He finished this 2 weeks before his deportation to Auschwitz. And it only survived thanks to his sister, who held on to the manuscript. And it's hard to tell. I would be projecting my own views if I said, well, this clearly gives his experience of what was taking place during the Holocaust. But I think there is something to be said about how music does give some insight potentially into the emotional state of a composer, into where their mind was. Maybe it was something as simple as, well, he knew that he had limited time in the concentration camp, and so this had to be completed. Who knows? There certainly is some testimony that exists related to this, and to this particular work, and there is some print, I should say, articles written as well. But I think the work stands on its own. So the other thing I say about this work is, while I love putting it into programs like this that are really focused on suppressed music, music of the Holocaust, etc., I also say that if you are a string player out there, it's equally, if not more powerful, to take a piece like this and instead put it next to a piece by Beethoven, and it elevates this work to the level that I think it really deserves. So with that, I will turn it over to the live recording of the Gideon Klein String Trio. It's a truly spectacular work by Gideon Klein. I encourage you to listen to all three movements. Unfortunately, we just don't have that kind of time today. Um, with that, I'm also just going to remind everyone, especially if you are just tuning in now on Facebook, please post your questions. I would love to answer your questions. If you have any questions related to this song, any of the songs previously, music in general related to the Holocaust, this is your opportunity to ask. I'm here and I love a good conversation. So please do post. With that, we're going to move on, and I wanted to explore just a little bit with you how individuals use religion and faith, which thinking that we've been talking about a lot of Jewish music up to this point, but we really haven't talked about anything quote unquote religious yet. And I think there's something really interesting about the role of the work Ani Ma'amin, and so I wanted to share that with you. As many of you may or may not know, the song Ani Ma'amin it has a specific role in the Jewish world, in that it speaks to the undying faith that one needs to have in the coming of the Messiah. So whether you express yourself that way or not, or you have your own connection to that religion. The Ani Ma'amin has so many examples of showing up in places where you wouldn't expect to see expressions of faith. There's documented moments of Ani Ma'amin being sung in several different concentration camps. Famously, there were individuals chanting Ani Ma'amin as they were being separated in Auschwitz. The famous left or right turn that led you either to work or to the gas chambers. The people singing Ani Ma'amin as they went into the gas chambers, and the lyrics, just so everyone understands the context, are, "I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah, and though he may tarry, yet will I believe and await his coming." So first, I want to share this traditional version that you may or may not be familiar with. If you're Jewish, you will have heard it at some point, likely. So now I need to quickly reorient myself toward the piano. We're getting down how to do a program from home down to a science. So the traditional melody, I'll just sing it once so everyone knows what it sounds like. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani. I messed that up. One more time. Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani Ma'amin, Ani. It's treated as a chant. And as I was examining the use of this song, I was looking into other settings of it and seeing how people had used it. And I thought it was very interesting that Debbie Friedman recorded well, first of all, she recorded her own cover of Ani Ma'amin. I shouldn't say a cover, but a setting of Ani Ma'amin. And then when I dug in a little bit, not only did I realize that she had done this version of Ani Ma'amin, but she had titled an album Ani Ma'amin. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. Why would she do that? And then I thought about the year in which it was published. It was Debbie's Anima Amin was written in 1974. I believe the full album was released in 74 or 76. And it occurred to me that this was right as the Vietnam War was ending. 1973 was the signing of the Paris Accords. The Paris Accords in between the to end American operations in Vietnam. And while I don't have other documentation to support this yet, um, my theory and my inkling is that either this was a direct response or perhaps it just reflects the changing in national mood and and the way people were feeling about the future as the Vietnam War was ending. So now you've heard this version, Anima Mina, this minor chant. Now we're going to listen to Debbie Friedman's new take on an old melody. Unfortunately, this is the only one where I don't have a video for it, so I will just have to share my little DJ screen of the music player. And I think you'll all hear how this, in many ways, is a very optimistic take on Anima Amin. And you know, whether it's a traditional idea of what Mashiach is, the idea of an actual Messiah, or maybe Messiah is just us trying to find our place in the universe and trying to find a relative peace. So with that, enjoy Debbie Friedman's Anima Amin. As much as I enjoy that setting of Anima Amin, it I can't let it play the whole way just because I'm realizing what time it is and we still have a little bit more to go through. If anyone is interested in that song, wants to hear more of it, I encourage you to take a look at Debbie Friedman's album Anima Amin. It's also on the many different anthologies of Debbie Friedman. And you know, it certainly speaks to my traditional Jewish upbringing too. So it's always fun to listen to that one. So with that, I'm gonna move on just to one. I'm a folkie at heart in a lot of ways, and I couldn't help myself with the idea of looking at some of the folk reactions to Vietnam as well. And in a true coincidence, this actually lined up with a Jewish artist a very interesting individual. So the song that I wanted to share with all of you, some of you may know this, some of you may not, comes from the singer Phil Oakes, a real troubadour in his own right. Really did his own documentation of what music was, or what was taking place during the Vietnam War, and you know, his issues with war in general. And I found it to be a really interesting historical document into the mindset of an individual who lived through this time period. So with that, I'm gonna grab what other instrument? Jumping around here today. All right, I won't sing the whole thing just because we are a little short on time, and I want to get to everything. But if anyone is interested in exploring the song further, this is Phil Oakes' "Oh, I Ain't Gonna March No More," and it was an anthem of the anti-Vietnam War movement. Oh, I marched to the Battle of New Orleans at the end of the early British War. Oh, a young land started growing, a young blood started flowing, but I ain't marching anymore. For I killed my share of Indians in 1,000 different fights. I was there at the Little Big Horn. Heard many men lying, saw many more a-dying, but I ain't marching anymore. Oh, it's always the old who lead us to the war, always the young to fall. Look at all we've done with just a saber and a gun. Tell me, was it worth it all? For I stole California from the Mexican lands. Oh, I fought in the bloody Civil War. Yes, I even killed my brother and so many others, but I ain't marching anymore. Oh, I marched to the Battle of the German Trench, in war that was bound to end all wars. Oh, I must have killed 1,000,000 men, but now they want me back again, but I ain't marching anymore. For I flew the final mission in the Japanese skies, and I set off the mighty mushroom roar. When I saw their cities burning, I knew that I was learning that I ain't marching anymore. Now the labor leaders dreaming at the close the missile plant. They united fruit screams at the Cuban shore. Call it peace or call it treason, call it love, call it reason, but I ain't marching anymore. No, I ain't marching anymore. So I always loved that song by Phil Oakes. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm just gonna give you before we perform our last song and I bring out a guest. I did want to quickly mention that so much is taking place right now in response to COVID-19. Despite our lockdown, despite not being able to in person work with other musicians, there is an incredible amount of artistic collaboration taking place right now. And I just wanted to highlight two different individuals who I think are truly astounding. They both come from the Yiddish klezmer world and are just amazing musicians. So one is Daniel Kahn. I mentioned Daniel Kahn already. He just recently released a Yiddish cover of a Bob Dylan tune. I'm not going to play all of it, just going to play a quick clip. But it, in and of itself, is kind of an interesting response to the current situation, and it's the lyrics definitely speak to the current situation. So this is his own translation, and I think he did an amazing job. So let's give it a listen real quick. I'm sorry we can't listen to all of it because it is really good.
Die ganze Welt ist voll mit Sonne und wie ein Jahr ist jede Show. Nur ich gedenk noch jeden Onem, was hat mich verschlossen da. Mein Morgensohn wird scheinen, soll die Zeit.
So unfortunately we just don't have the time to let that play, but a quick shout out to Daniel Kahn if he is watching. An incredible tune, an incredible arrangement, and I hope everyone takes the time to listen to this one. And then the one other thing that I didn't get to really talk much about, but I'll just briefly mention, is the important role of humor in traumatic events. This individual, Michael Winograd, is an amazing clarinetist, band leader, organizer for community events like Klez Canada and Yiddish New York, and has an amazing sense of humor. And when this all started, he came right back from Germany because he was coming from Germany, had to go into lockdown for 14 days, and every day released a new track. And they're musically brilliant and hilarious. So I'll share 2 quick clips of this, and then we're going to sing our last song.
Isolated from you, isolated from you. Here in my studio basement apartment with nothing to do. No more hanging around like we're used to, or shopping at secondhand store.
And then this one is just too funny, so I couldn't help myself.
Toilet paper when you're in a bind. Toilet paper, once not hard to find. Wasn't a commodity, plenty there for you and me. When stores are out and shelves are empty, better hold it in.
And with that, I'm glad to see there are a couple of questions coming in. I will let's sing one more song, and then I will start addressing questions directly. For this song, I want to invite a colleague of mine to join me. Katelyn Carlos is an incredible vocalist and a doctoral candidate in musicology in the UCLA Herb Alpert School of Music. Katelyn and I actually have never met in person. But I was lucky enough to be paired with Katelyn as she's my TA for the music of the Holocaust class that I'm currently teaching at UCLA. And Katelyn is just an amazing breadth of knowledge, has really cool ideas about music, and as it turns out, is a fantastic singer. So and I was able to put her on the spot and ask her to learn this tune very, very quickly. So you are all seeing the first digital collaboration for Katelyn and I on a song called Unser Mut wird nicht gebrochen. And just a little bit of background on this particular tune. So this was written by an individual named Yeshua Israel Sendorf. What's really unique about this song is that it was presented both in French and in Yiddish, because it was presented at a French concentration camp, in a concentration camp called Pithiviers, which is about 40 kilometers south, I believe, of Paris. Many people don't know that there were many concentration camps all throughout France. Pithiviers was one of the main ones that filtered to Drancy, which filtered eventually to Auschwitz. But this particular song, the reason I like to end a lot of programs with it is it really is just a message of hope that they sang within this concentration camp. So I'll read the English. We won't be performing all the verses, but we have created a little bit of arrangement, so I hope you guys enjoy it. The English is as follows, and this is a poetic translation. Our courage is unbroken, for we listen to life's call. Victory will soon be spoken. We will triumph over all. See the world once more in flower, just like each year in month of May. Brothers all, we have the power. Free the world is what they say. Wives and children, they are waiting. They will see us in our home, our courage celebrating, and the miracle will come. Yes, we've heard that same old song now, hatred between Christian and Jew. But the heart cries out, it's wrong now, as the fields turn green anew. From our barracks rising proud now, our singing greets the morn. For us all the field is plowed now, and for all men grow the corn. So with that, this is our last tune. Please take this opportunity to enjoy and put your questions in the chat, and we'll get to them right after the song.
Unser Mut wird nicht gebrochen, sieht das Leben wunderschön, klingt von Beten schön gezogen, überall, wo's ist gemein. Die Welt, sie blätt schön wieder, für jede Jahr, jede Menge. Jeder Mensch, der singen Brüder, schmutzt die Welt, doch werden frei. In der dort Weib und Kinder wollen Tag und Wiedersehen. Unser Mut wird weisen Wunder und das Nest wird doch geschehen. Seht die Welt, sie blätt schön wieder, für jeden Jahr, jede Menge. Jeder Mensch, der singen Brüder, schmutzt die Welt, doch werden frei.
Fantastic, Katelyn. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, so let's see. We got some questions coming in. Fantastic. All right. So, looking here. So, oh, thank you. Oh, you guys are so wonderful and complimentary. I'm blushing. All right. So, a question from Jordana Gessler. Do modern day nigunim trace their origins to this music? That's an interesting question. I'm not sure exactly which tune you're referring to. But what I can say is nigunim are very closely related to a lot of the other Eastern European musics that now comprise what we call klezmer. So klezmer and Yiddish music, which are often grouped together, really are kind of made up genres. Klezmer really is a combination of dance music and vocal music and music from all. I mean, the Pale of Settlements was huge. I mean, it occupied an enormous space between the Black Sea and the Baltic Sea, and there was a number of different traditions going on. Within that, thousands of nigunim were written, and each group of Jews had their. I mean, the Bubover nigunim are not the same as the Lubavitch nigunim. They really have their own sound. So that's a great question. I could say that there's certainly relationships between these different types of musics. If you want a direct correlation, there's a very interesting piece by Gideon Klein called Lullaby, which is often attributed to I think a Moravian nigun. I'm not entirely certain, but it's certainly related to a nigun in its own way. So great question. Let's see. Other than Gideon Klein, are there other gifted composers who perished during the Holocaust whose music is not well known but should be? With renewed interest in Yiddish, do you think we'll see a resurgence in Yiddish music? So two huge questions there, and great questions. Let's start with the first one. So, are there other gifted composers who perished during the Holocaust whose music is not well known but should be? Yes, 1,000 times yes. There are so many. Unfortunately, we don't know all of them. Not all the songs that we have are attributed to someone. The formal composers. So if we're referring to Gideon Klein, then we're probably thinking more in the formalist world. Just in Theresienstadt, there were a number of composers. There were also original works coming out of places like Auschwitz. Westerbork had a very interesting cabaret scene. So the easy answer is yes. The difficult answer is, oh God, where do you start? So what I would encourage you to do, if you're interested in exploring other composers, luckily there are some great resources related to this material. The World ORT organization has created a website called Music in the Holocaust, which is just a huge database. I know LA Moth, who, again, thank you so much for having me. LA Moth certainly has resources. USHMM, our colleagues out in Washington, D.C., have a great database on their website. Yad Vashem has a small one as well. There's a lot of different collections. So I encourage you to explore them all. But World ORT and USHMM are great places to start. And I always encourage people, if you want more information, reach out to me directly, please. I love to share what I'm into, so please reach out to me. With renewed interest in Yiddish, do you think we'll see a resurgence in Yiddish music? Easy answer is it's already happened and or happening. So those of us that live kind of in the Yiddish culture world, klezmer world, would say that we are really on like a third or fourth wave of the klezmer revival, and Yiddish being a part of that. For many people, you know, Yiddish music never died. It was always there. It really is. It didn't need reviving. It just needed to, you know, be boosted a little bit. There were always practitioners of Yiddish song and the wonderful music around that. But we are definitely in a third or fourth wave of interest. You know, if you really want to track it, you can kind of think of the 1970s with the first wave of the Yiddish revival correlating with the folk revival. Took place in a few different places. You know, it was based in Brooklyn and actually here in LA and up in Berkeley. There were a few interesting examples. Groups like the Klezmorim, Ellis Island Band, Zev Feldman and Andy Statman. I mean, amazing groups. And then there was another wave with some of the guys who started incorporating more jazz and were less purist. You know, in some ways, I hope I didn't upset anybody by using words like purist. But you know, groups like the Klezmatics, of course, stand out as being a really interesting fusion group. And now, I mean, there's an entire wave of Yiddish and klezmer music coming out. I mean, Michael Winograd and Daniel Kahn are just a couple of examples of a much larger scene that has, you know, hubs in several different cities. So New York, of course, is a hub. Philadelphia is a hub. Berlin is one of the main hubs of the klezmer scene, which is really interesting. In Northern Europe in general, there's a lot of interest in klezmer. I shouldn't even say Northern Europe. I mean, Europe in general has a real interest in klezmer and Yiddish culture, but Berlin for sure. On any given night, you can find a klezmer jam in Berlin, which is really, really cool. So Yiddish music is all over the place, and you just kind of have to know where to look, who the artists are. But that's an easy rabbit hole to fall into, and it's a fun one. Are there any other questions? I hope there's some questions coming in. Doesn't look like it. Well, maybe with that, I think that's it. All right. So with that, I just want to give a huge thanks to Jill Brown and the LA Museum of the Holocaust. It's an incredible resource that we have here in LA. Everyone should take advantage of their events and their interesting exhibits. And also just a huge thank you to Katelyn Carlos for joining me in this program. So thank you both.
Thank you so much, Lorry Black and Katelyn Carlos, for the beautiful music and the fascinating presentation. Katelyn, your voice is beautiful. Lorry, it's wonderful how you were able to include such a variety of different types of music in just a 1-hour presentation. We traveled the world and so many different time spans. Thank you. Before we close, I want to let everyone know that while the museum is closed, our staff is working hard to provide meaningful and educational content like today's program. Tomorrow at noon, we'll host a talk by Holocaust survivor Rita Lorry and her daughter, human rights activist Leslie Gilbert Lorry. Rita and Leslie are the authors of Bending Toward the Sun, a memoir that brings together the stories of 3 generations of women in their family. You can find more information about all our virtual events on this Facebook page and on our website, lamoth.org. Thank you again to Lorry and Katelyn and to everyone for watching. Take care, and we hope to see you all again soon.